Okay, so we have to start today's talk. So today's talk, the first talk will be given by Professor Ami-NCKU, and he's working at the University of Newcastle. Actually, I've been there for many times,
Yes.
and we had a very great time at Newcastle. It's a very nice place. So welcome students to come to Australia and Newcastle to visit Ami. And actually, I met Ami. If I remember correctly, is in 2011 CPC. So that would be the first time that I met Ami, and Ami is very active and very energetic to welcome me to join the CPC conference. It's a very great time here. So actually, I attend that meeting annually if I can make it possible. So today, Ami is going to talk about some new research. It's maybe it's a little bit different from yesterday's talk, but Ami is very interested in doing some mathematical modeling and combine with to address very important issues in cognitive psychology. So please join me to welcome Professor Ami-NCKU.
Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Thank you very much, everybody. Actually, I'm moving along, so maybe I'll put this aside because I like to move my hands around along. So thank you very much for the very kind introduction. I have to say I'm humbled twice. I'm humbled by the very kind hospitality. I think our visit here had been nothing short of remarkable. And I'm just overwhelmed by the hospitality and the camaraderie that is shown to us by Professor Young, the students and the staff of the university. And I'm also humbled to see the quality of work that we have been presented with, both by students as well as colleagues from different parts of the world. So I think the last 2 days have been really impressive in terms of the scientific content, both in terms of depth and breadth. So the level of detail that is accompanying mathematical psychology and the modeling of human behavior, but also how many different areas we have seen covered. And I feel very, very lucky to be part of this group. And of course, a very big kudos to Professor Townsend, who is in some sense, the father of this movement. And we are very lucky to have him as well. So many great thanks to everybody and the host especially. So before I will start, maybe I should follow up on Professor Young's introduction in saying that this is slightly different perhaps than what we have seen yesterday. So yesterday's focus, and perhaps some of the talks that we've seen by students, were primarily about how to model human cognition when we think about a single person. So when we've seen the development that Jim had offered, you can think about how a single observer is dealing with information in a serial fashion, one source of information after the other, or if people can process information at the same time in parallel. That is within an observer. We'll take one person to study what they do. And then the work that had been presented by our colleague, Professor Fifich, had been about face perception. So take one person, show them a face, and see how they process those faces. For quite a long time, my lab in Newcastle, and as a matter of fact, also Professor Young here, had thought whether these cognitive modeling tools can be extended or scaled up to study the behavior of groups, of teams. So the question that we will be asking is, can we use the same modeling techniques to look not only at a single observer and what they do, but also at the interactions of multiple people or agents or human and bots when they operate together? To me, this kind of question is interesting because when you're working in science, you don't want to have, well, in my mind at least, you do not want to have too many models. One model for that phenomena, another modeling approach for this phenomena, and a completely different model for this. So it would be great if a single modeling framework could be used to describe multiple scales of behavior. So And so what I hope to do is to demonstrate to you how we take some of the modeling techniques that have been used in cognitive science, cognitive psychology, and use them to understand behavior of people in a team or in a group. And so today, if time permits, I'll show you how we do this with a very common theory of risky decision-making, prospect theory. And then those of you who might be joining us in Taipei, this is where I hope to apply the very same machinery that we talked about in the past few days. Jim Townsend's SFT, also to study group behavior. Today is not so much about SFT, but it's over the horizon. It would happen in 2 days as well. Also, I have to say that if you have any questions, I'm quite happy to answer them as we go, right? I find this specific topic quite exciting, so we don't need to cover everything. If you want to stop and ask questions, we can just do that. This is my second time to Taiwan already. I have to admit the last one was not so hot. So, right, so that, I think this would have been in November maybe? Yeah. And you can see that we actually have our jumpers, right? So we have long sleeves. The temperature was different, but the experience was equally good. You know the famous saying, perhaps in English, that it takes a village to grow a child. And I think the same is true for any scientific project. Any project requires team effort and a big community of people that support. And so maybe I'll flag out a few of these names that have been instrumental in my own work. You know, and I'll be the first one to admit that I'm actually not that smart as my mother thinks. So my mom thinks I'm the best and smartest kid, you know, in the world, but I'm not, to be honest. And quite often I need to rely on my colleagues and students to help me when I'm falling short of knowing what to do. So on the top left would be Murray Bannett, who had been instrumental in this work. He had been a PhD student in Newcastle, and he's now finishing his postdoc with Professor Hart. And I think the second important contributor to this work has been Rachel Mullard, who had been this is a funny story, I'll share this with you. She had been an honors student in my lab, so she had been an undergraduate student and was very interested in the project and wanted to work on it. And at the conclusion of this project, I said, look, Rachel, this is such an exciting project. Maybe you would like to continue to do your PhD, your graduate research in the lab. And she said, I would love to, but sorry, I cannot. I've already committed to another job. So I asked, that's great. What kind of job you have in mind? And she said, I'm going to be an assistant clown. An assistant clown. So it turns out that her sister has a business for clowns that go to kids' birthdays. So, you know, children have birthday and a clown shows up and entertains them and the jackets and whatnot. So Rachel replaced a very promising academic career with one of an assistant clown. So this will be Rachel. And then there's quite a few people, and I hope to perhaps mention a few of them along the way as we progress or as we need. And maybe just to mention something about how the project actually started. So Mark Adam is an expert in electronic commerce. I didn't know anything about Dutch auction. I'll tell you in a moment about Dutch auction. I did not know anything about this. But then the best way to start a scientific project is to have coffee together. So we sat in a cafe and we tell each other a little bit about what we do. And Mark tells me, oh, you know, I'm interested in electronic auctions. And I tell him, you know, I'm interested in human decision making. And then suddenly together we think, is there an auction that requires a specific kind of decision making that we can study together? And that is how things start. Over a cup of coffee, always. This is Jim's advice, right? Get someone, sit with a cup of coffee, have a conversation. And there's a few more people again, if time permits, we'll get to their contribution as well. I have to also thank our supporters, so the funding agencies from the Australian Research Council and the Osmore Institute. Maybe just a few words about Newcastle if you have not been there. So Professor Young had visited us quite a few times, and Newcastle is on the east side of the Australian continent, about 2 hours maybe from Sydney. And this is how it looks like. Sometimes it rains, so it may not look like that, but most days actually, you know, there's phenomenal weather and quite pristine beaches, very nice beaches. And the university also has this really nice building that, of course, I don't sit in because I sit in this very old building, as you can imagine. So our lab used to sit in this building, and now we've moved from this building to another old building. But we are not sitting, not in this nice. Our lab is quite vibrant, so we have quite a few students and CIs, and we do like to spend time together, not only studying science, but also very many social activities. So let's talk a little bit about the kind of things that we're interested in right now. So the main question that I wish to ask is what happens to performance of people when they are now working in a team? This could be in competitive and collaborative environments. Today, I will only talk about competition. And then in Taipei, I hope to also mention or cover what happens to humans when they play computer games together in a collaborative environment, either with other players or with AI agents. So we scale up modeling techniques that are normally used to study one person to a team behavior. And the question that I would like to ask today is what happens to human decision making in the context of a Dutch auction? Now, can I have a quick show of hands? How many of you know what a regular auction is to begin with? A regular auction? A few. Okay. So maybe I should start by actually reminding how a regular auction works out. So this is an example from Christie's or Sotheby's. They're auction houses. And the way this works is that there is some item for sale, such as the painting on the left-hand side. And the people in the audience can bid. So they can call out numbers that indicate the price they are willing to pay. Now, quite often the auction house, which will be the auctioneer, they keep on raising the price. So for example, we could say, who is willing to pay $1 million for this painting by Rembrandt? And Shushan, maybe, yeah. And so I say, $1 million for the person with the pink shirt, first time, second time. And now someone else can say, 2 million. So I'm shouting now, 2 million for the person with the white shirt, right? I mean, I cannot know Shushan in advance, right? Because, but you know, for the lady with the white dress or whatever is happening, you know, I shout out loud, 2 million first time, 2 million second time. And now Shushan gets very excited because he thinks that he gets the painting. He doesn't know that at this very moment, Professor Young is putting a hand up and he's saying, the department will cover it, 3 million. So my point is that there is some interesting attributes that are unique to this style of auction. First of all, the price is going up. This is called an ascending price auction. The second interesting feature is that each and every time, someone else can make a higher bid. So at no point, there is certainty that you are going to win. So Shushan was very comfortable with the 2 million, and he thought, I'm going to take it, but there is no certainty, because apparently Professor Young had been willing to raise the bar even further. So lack of certainty is another important characteristic. And finally, perhaps the second in this law, but the third notion that matters a lot is that there is no time limit. At least in theory, this can go on forever. And that is a problem. Because some items don't live forever. So if I would like to sell flowers, they have a limited life expectancy. If I would like to sell fresh meat or fresh fish, then I cannot wait forever for the auction to finish. So there has to be another mechanism to allow the sale of perishable goods, goods that have to be sold very, very quickly.
I mean, I just insert also options. Also, they have a lot of goods, right? So they have.
Yeah, that's another good point. So the quantity of goods needs to be transferred very rapidly. So what do we do instead? What do we do when we need to sell flowers or fish? We use a different mechanism of an auction, and this is called the Dutch auction. So in the Dutch auction, named after the Dutch flower market in Amsterdam, where they sell a lot of flowers, a bucket or a group of flowers would be presented on this conveyor belt with the price sold at the job. Now, to start with, the price is very high. As the auction starts, the flowers move on the conveyor belt to the end of the room, and the price goes down. And if you think that you are willing to pay the price at this very moment, you press a key, and as soon as you press that key, the flowers are yours for the price that is shown that very moment. So this kind of auction structure allows us a few advantages or changes relative to the ordinary auction. To begin with, it is a descending price auction. So price starts very high and goes down with time. But perhaps more conveniently, from a practical perspective, it offers certainty. So when I press that key, I know I got the flowers. Nobody else can outbid me anymore. That is one element. And it also ensures the limited time. So if the time to travel on the conveyor belt is 20 seconds, after 20 seconds, the auction is over. And if no one had bid, well, what do you think needs to happen if the flowers travel from one side to the other, and no one pressed the key in advance? We have to throw it away. Why do we have to throw it away?
And the price for other goods.
Yes, because if we do not throw it away, then someone will just grab it for free, and then in successive auctions, there would be no maintenance of the price. Absolutely. That is morbid, Jim. This is very morbid. No, the way that it actually works is something like this, right? So each and every of those patients is a florist. People that may work at the market or have a flower store, and they have this little button that I told you about. They see those flowers moving around, there's prices at the top. If they see a flower that they like, if they are willing to pay the price at this point in time, they press the key. If they want to buy it for a cheaper price, they need to wait. Or they need to wait for the price to decline. But if they wait for the price to decline, they risk someone else pressing the bidding key before them. So in other words, there is a very delicate trade-off or act of balance here. You can bid very early. I'll talk about this when we go to the experiments. Yeah. So this is a good question that I'll have to return to. Does it move in continuous steps or in a discrete or continuous fashion? And in fact, there's different mechanisms, and we would like to know which one of them affects human behavior in what way. So we have tested this experimentally. But the bottom line, I think, from a human behavior perspective, is this really intricate trade-off. On the one hand, people would like to press the key very early to ensure they get the goods. If I have a flower store and I need to stock my shop, I need to get those flowers. I want to be certain, so I press early. But if I press early, I pay premium for the price. So I would rather wait. But if I wait, I risk someone else taking the flowers ahead of me. Does that make sense? It's that trade-off that I think was most interesting to me when Mark and I had our little coffee. So this trade-off is one really strong motivation that had made us interested in Dutch auction. Let's think a little bit about a trade-off. What does a trade-off mean, really? So let's look at a few consumer decisions. Here's an example of a decision that I may need to make as a consumer. I have two identical cars. They're exactly the same. Maybe a Toyota Corolla. One of them is sold for almost 16,000 and the other one for 28,000. So exactly the same car for different price. And if this were the case, it is a no-brainer. You go for the cheaper car. Here's an example that is much more common in the study of psychological decision making. But I have not added yet probability, right? So at this point, I ask you, what would you rather take home $2,500 or take home $1,000? And again, it's a no-brainer. You offer me more money, I'll take more money. So the option on your left is preferred. So the trade-off in that sense does not appear yet because each one of those judgments that I've shown to you only had one attribute. So the items were equal on one attribute. So for example, here they are, well, you'll see the probabilities in a moment, but I only need to make a decision concerning the value. And if one item is higher value, surely I will take. But in real life, those problems are complicated. And they're complicated because we need to make decisions based on many, many attributes. And those attributes, well, they require some kind of a trade. So on the left-hand side, Toyota Corolla for 16,000. On the right-hand side, a Ferrari for maybe 28. I wish, right? I wish you could get a Ferrari for 28. So is this a Lamborghini? No. You see this yellow sign there? No, this is a Ferrari. You can see the emblem here. The roaring horse, right? All right. So what's the deal here? Here, much like real life, we need to take into account multiple attributes. For example, the car on the left is cheap, but is not as fast as impressive. The car on the right is very fast, but is also more costly. Is there a better car to buy? The answer to that is probably not. Which car you buy depends on your personal preference. If you like fast cars, you may be willing to pay more. If you like to not spend a lot of money, I'll get the Toyota Corolla. Going back to a common scenario in human decision making, quite often questions are presented in the following way. Would you rather take a large sum of money with some probability? So you can get $2,500, but I'll flip a coin. You only get it if I get heads and you get nothing if I get the others. Alternatively, you can get a certain sum of $1,000 for sure, no questions. So which one would you take? Again, this could be related to personal preferences, or we'll see later some other things. And also in the psychological literature, the very famous trade-off is that of respond quickly versus respond accurately. Quite often they cancel one another or they trade off. They're required to decide which one you care most about. So then, if I sum up the motivation for the study, why is it that we are interested in studying Dutch auction? From a theoretical perspective, it is a wonderful test bed for looking at ideas of trade-off and also how people operate together in a competitive environment when there are multiple agents, each vying or competing for the same thing. That is on the theory side. But, I think we saw a lot of the work coming from Professor Young already dealing with applied consequences of cognition. How does this matter in real life? And indeed, Dutch auction is a billions-dollar industry. There is a lot of money constantly shifting hands in those auctions. There are some practical questions that we ask. We can ask, for example, whether the continuous or discrete nature of moving across time, does it matter? Does it affect the human decision? We can ask, how do behavior changes over experience? So if you are learning over time, does it affect the way that you are willing to be? And one that I was particularly interested in from a practical perspective is how bidding changes with the start price. So in the early days of Kahneman and Tversky work, there had been some nice evidence to show anchoring effects. And the question that we can ask is this: for the same house, or the same painting, or the same bucket of flowers or whatnot, would people be willing to pay a different price if the initial start price is high versus low? In other words, does this affect my own evaluation of the commodity? We'll see some empirical support or empirical answers. So to test this, we can take a few texts, a few directions. I'll tell you first about the directions that we are not going to talk about, and then the one that I will present. So Dutch auctions are a real industry. So one way to go about this is to just go to the fish market and write down the prices and then go back home and do the analysis. People can do that. It turns out that the fish market starts at 4 a.m. And, you know, neither of us likes to wake up at 4 a.m. So we didn't do that. Now, that is not the reason why we did not do that. The main reason is that there are some commercial confidence issues concerning registering data in the auction. And so we have contacted a few auction houses, and they were not very keen yet, at least, to let us in to actually report that. The best next scenario would go to public data. And it turns out lots of public data about TV Dutch auctions. There's a lot of television games or shows whereby an item is presented for you, and you can actually purchase it by calling some number and make your bid. But there's lots of Dutch auction-like data available. And so we have an army of students who are watching those videos and are recording the time and the bid. And they do some other really interesting things, but at least initially they need to record the data. I won't be talking about this. I will be talking about an actual experiment. So we conducted a simulation experiment or a simulated environment to test Dutch auction behavior. And the cover story is this. So imagine that you are a florist trying to stock your store. For each and every one of you, and going to participate in the Dutch auction, you have a flower shop, and in the morning, you need to go to the market and buy enough flowers to fill in your stock so that you can sell flowers to the masses. And the interface and the steps would look something like that. I will walk you through those steps, and I will then show you a short animation of how this may look like in real time. And the team aspect for your information is by conducting this with 3 players, all playing against each other at the same time. So they sit in the same room, working on 3 computers, each one of them competing or trying to fill in their shop, while the other 2 are also competing for this limited amount of flowers. Not all 3 of them can fill in their shops. So the starting condition is competitive. There is not enough flowers for all 3 of them to be successful at the end of the day. So the steps would look like this. Again, you are a florist trying to stock your store. You have $250, and you need some amount of units, flowers or buckets of flowers. You'll see in a moment that there is a start and end price. I'll show you how they are presented in the display. And price drops with time by some fixed steps. So price starts high. By the way, price always starts higher than what the evaluator or anticipated sale price is. It always has to start higher. If it's not higher, people will respond instantaneously, right? If the price is too low, then as soon as the auction starts, you can press.
So, like another really fascinating of this is this kind of thing where the value of flowers can be kind of ephemeral and likely be compared to how much money bidder thinks they can get out of it. By just going to get a bar, you can look up online and find out what the average price of a bar is.
That is true. So I did not mention this, but one important element of auctions in general, or perhaps one of the major uses of auctions in general, not only Dutch auction, but auctions in general, is when you don't have a good estimate of what the price should be. And you want to let the market determine what the price should be. And so in art, for example, the value of a unique piece of art is not determined by the materials from which it is made or by the amount of labor put into it. They're very subjective elements and they differ from one potential buyer to the other. And so auctions in general, I think, try to target the fact that there's just uncertainty about the actual value and allows the market to determine how much it is willing to pay. There's a few variables that we have been playing with. For example, the time step duration. The time step duration mimics the continuous versus the discrete movement on that conveyor belt. So from the participant's perspective, 50 milliseconds looks like a continuous shift in the price. And the 500 milliseconds perceptually looks like jumps in price. So we manipulate that. We'd like to know, is there a different pattern of behavior? So, we also looked at the opponent. Was it a human or was it a computer? So in one experiment, people played against two other human opponents. And in another experiment, they played against two other AI agents. But I think the data I present today is mostly the human data. Maybe in Taipei, I talk more about human-bot interactions. Oh, and of course, I think I mentioned earlier, we test the effect of experience. So we learn, we change the behavior, and what is the effect of start price? So can I change how people bid by setting a high start price? So here's, yes, please. Yes, they do have limited budget, yes. So again, with unlimited budget, a little bit like having a low start price, if I have unlimited budget, there is no gain. As soon as the auction starts, I press the key, I don't mind paying a lot of money, right? So there has to be constraints and balance budget. Admittedly, Chengta, those budget constraints are probably related in real life to how much money you think you can get by selling those flowers. And that is something that we have not treated in this, but is something that we deal with when we look at real auctions, right? So in real auctions, people actually take into account not just how much they are paying now, but how much they think they can sell those things later. And one of our students is looking at internet auctions and needs to build this into account, Keegan. All right, so let's see if this works. Sometimes it does, sometimes it does not. Let me just present the setup. So this is the simulated interface to mimic the kind of auction environment. On the left-hand side, this is your warehouse. The warehouse at the moment is completely blue, meaning that it is empty. As the auction progresses, you will see my warehouse filling up. You'll see a colored bar getting further up to indicate that I've accumulated or aggregated more and more flowers. In some experiments or in some conditions, you can also see your opponents. So you can also see the amount of flowers your opponents have, but in this condition, in this experiment, we do not see. In this condition, you only see how much you have accumulated. This here is a visual representation of the price bar. So the price will start at the top, that bar, and with time, the price will go down. And this is the amount of funds that you have. So you start with $250, $150. If you make it big now and you are successful, then what you expect to see is some flowers added to the top. So if I want it big right now, you'll see something big up here, meaning I add more flowers to my repository, to my storehouse. And you'll also see the funds going down because of spend money. Does that make sense? Let's see if the animation would help illustrate this a little bit. If it works.
Here are the extra points if you have something left over.
I don't have a good answer to that in the sense that these are design decisions that you can go back and forth with. So one design decision could be, do you get bonus for saving money? And we had some conditions in which you have and some conditions in which you haven't. But some other design decisions are perhaps even more interesting, and that is, do you get more money if you fill in your store and also prevent your opponent from filling his store? So the question would then be, do you get extra reward, not just by winning, but also by depriving the other store from getting flowers? Because that means that when you are going to then sell your flowers, you have exclusive ownership of the commodity. And in some conditions, we manipulate that as well. But if you ask me what is the right way to do it, I would put my arms up and say, I have no idea. Right? We just play with different design choices and see how it applies. So have a look at the animations, and let's see how it builds up with time. Remember again that this one is the price, so it will start high and will go down. And the players, sit with a key, and they can press the key at any time they're willing to pay that. In this case, I didn't press anything, I didn't press. But now the price is going down. I lost. So red means that someone else took it, and I didn't get anything. It gets red, I press it, and now I get extra commodity. This would be my extra commodity. Three again, so I got some extra commodity, and my funds is going down. Right? So you can see that each time I win, the fund is going down. And soon enough, if I'm lucky, I get enough store. No, I was not lucky this time. Someone else got it, so I'm red. I'm up. If I get this one, got it. So this would be an example of one auction round. So there would be multiple rounds, and the numbers were set up, or the funds were set up in a way that only one or two, I don't remember, only one or two participants could fill in the warehouse at any given auction. So there's no way for all three of them to successfully fill in the warehouse. Does that make sense? Yeah. Okay. So this is how the games works.
I guess one of the main issues optimal rules for the option. So is it possible to use prices on your topics?
Well, not in our experiment. And
It's like
yes, and so in real life, what the example is, in the internet, there are auctions that sell items for tokens. I forgot how it is called. Non-something tokens, NFTs, non-fungible tokens. No. So non-fungible tokens are really auctions. And so, as I mentioned, one of our students, Keegan, is actually looking at internet auctions. He's extracting data from those auctions. And in those auctions, I think the present estimate is that about 80% of sales are actually not managed by humans. There's some algorithm that is either making the choices automatically or at least feeding information to the human to make those choices. And I would assume this proportion would only increase.
Like in a housing, not really problem or finding parking problem is if an undefined or point of the third rule that probably the only third right for the go on heavy.
Yeah.
So do you have a optimal solution?
Yeah.
Problem?
Yes. Yeah. How much time do we have in time? Let's play. Because this is such an interesting question that I think it would be great to bring it to discussion. 1 minute. 1 minute? Oh, 15 minutes. Okay. I think it's fine. Look, if we don't cover everything, this is a really great question, right? So for those of you who haven't heard, Mario was asking, is there an optimal policy? And if there is an optimal policy, you know, can leaders bring it into the environment? Can they use computer as aids? I would answer to this yes and no. So auctions, for the most part, can be studied primarily by economists. If you ask an economist if there is an optimal strategy, they will say, absolutely. There is always an optimal solution. And then psychologists might come and say, yeah, but really? Because from an economist perspective, you optimize or you are maximizing something very concrete, which is perhaps the financial value. But from a psychological perspective, the optimal solution could be quite different. People may be trying to optimize something completely different. Just maybe, for example, maybe for me, a good feeling is what I try to optimize. And maybe for me, to obtain good feeling, I don't even need to actually clean the warehouse. Maybe I derive satisfaction for making sure that my opponents do not fill in their warehouse. That's, you know, human nature, right? To be engaged in a competition. So that would be one example whereby what is an optimal policy based on normative models, so what economists would use, a normative model, may not be at all an optimal solution from a psychological perspective. And there's another interesting phenomenon that shows deviation from optimal solution or optimal behavior. It is called auction fear. Have any of you ever participated in an auction? You have? Okay. How's the feeling? Can you tell us a little bit about the feeling?
Much.
Okay. So there's a fear to pay too much, right? So there's psychological factors that affect how we behave in this environment. What about you, Jim? What is the kind of...
Great people really want that bag. Really like to
Yeah.
Worse is that when you at some auction place, you go a lot, you say, oh, there's that guy over there. So you know you're bidding against a certain person, certain kind of thing, but then they can change their strategy as they like what you're doing. So they can make even an optimal solution, kind of an ongoing goal that then gets played.
Yes. Could I ask, is there anybody here participating in competitive sports? Or what are you? Taekwondo. And Jim? Taekwondo. Yeah. So, you know, if you look at athletes participating in competitive sports, there's also not only the desire to maybe defeat the opponent and be the winner, but also some physiological characteristics that accompany the excitement of the tournament. So the tournament starts and you get this excitement and your heart starts beating before the tournament and you sweat a little bit. All those things actually appear in an auction as well. So physiological studies and electrophysiological studies looking at auctions shows that during the auction, the physiological parameters as measured by heart rate variability, galvanic skin responses, which Shuran probably knows better than I do about, all those parameters show a great increase in the activation. Auction fever is a specific outcome and quite an interesting one. So auction fever is actually the propensity or tendency to not bid optimally when you are willing to bid, but rather wait to prolong the excitement. So let's suppose that right now, I told myself, I'm willing to pay $70 for these flowers. For me, it would make economic sense because I know that I can sell them for $100. So if I buy them for $70 right now, I get good profit. Auction fever is the finding that even though I'm willing to press the key now and pay $70, I'm actually not doing it because I enjoy the thrill of the hunt, the sensation of actually waiting a little bit longer to see if I can get it for an even lower price. And I don't care about not paying the 70. I'm willing to pay it, but I'm excited by the prospect of seeing what happens next. And so these are really irrational factors, right? And so I think, Mario, to answer your very short question with a very long answer, there are optimal policies. And when we look at optimal policies, we need to sometimes ask ourselves, what is it that what do the bidders try to optimize? And from an economic perspective, there would be a solution. But from a psychological perspective, different people and different crowds could try to achieve different things. And this makes it very interesting for us. So I think we understand roughly how the game works. Can I get a quick show of hands just to see that you understand how the auction works? Are we all clear how this actually works? Excellent. All right. And there's some other things there. The goal is to fill in your store by the end of the block with as little dollars as possible. So this would be one instance. And maybe you get a reward for saving money at the end. Maybe in some other condition, we say, and also make sure that the other players don't fill their warehouses. You can play with those design parameters. I think we've seen this one. So maybe I should jump to some results. And then if time permits, what kind of a model we'll try to implement. So this is one of a few experiments. I'll focus only on just the one, which I think is a human-human. So not a human bot. Yeah, I'll show you how it looks like. And I will report results in the form of Bayes vector. I don't know how many of you are routinely using Bayes vector. I've seen a few of you using JASP, I think in Jamovi, or JASP maybe. So you know there's a Bayesian option in JASP. And so for our purposes, if I report a Bayes vector that is Bayes vector. So Bayes vector essentially gives us the likelihood of some alternative hypothesis over the null hypothesis. If the Bayes vector is very big, that means that the alternative hypothesis, which normally we say there is a significant effect, right? So there is an effect, is much larger than the null hypothesis. And there's many conventions, but the one that I use here is the value of 10. So Bayes vector of alternative over null greater than 10, which suggests that the effect is significant if I convert this to the frequencies here. And if the Bayes vector is smaller than 1 over 10, then I would say that the data supports the null. And if the Bayes vector is between those two values, then we'd argue the evidence is inconclusive. So we don't have enough support either in favor of the null or the alternative effect. So some of the key questions of interest, and I'll try to go over this reasonably quickly, I hope. Is there a change in DD behavior due to learning? Does step size matter if it is continuous or not? Especially if there is an effective starting price. To me, this is a huge one because knowing whether start price has an effect or not can, first of all, allow us to go to auction houses and tell them you can manipulate the start price to gain more monetary values. If we are the bad people, if we are the good people on this side, we can go to consumer organizations and tell them, hey, actually, there's an effective start price. You should monitor this. So this depends on whether I stand here for the consumers or standing here and advising auction houses. Scientists can have a lot of power sometimes, and we need to read it very carefully on the record. And finally, time permits, can go over a model that captures the memories. So very quickly, this is the bidding price. So how much people were willing to pay as they progress in the growth. And as you can see, there's not any real trend in the data. So the first answer, or the first answer that we can derive, is that there is no effect of learning in these simulated environments. As I progress from block 1 to 2 to 3 to 4 to 5, I was bidding at roughly the same amount. You can see a very small base factor. Discrete versus continuous price change. So does it matter whether the steps in which I take the price down and move the commodity change in steps or continuously? And the answer is no, it doesn't matter. That's a practical question that is important. I think this was the most interesting one. Does start price matter? In other words, are people willing to pay more in the auction if there's some manipulation of the start price? So over here, again, you can see the bid price, the function of the start price into different dependent variables or conditions, different units. You can see the regression line. And then you can also see that if we break the price to starting prices between $500 to $50 to $100 and $100 to $150, people are willing to pay much more. If the start price was high, then if the start price was less. That is a huge effect. I'm not talking now about base rate, it's just looking how much more they are willing to pay. If I was willing to pay $50 for exactly the same flowers, if this starting price, or range starting price, are willing to pay 1/3 more if the starting price was higher for exactly the same for start price method.
But surely what's happening with your competitive bidders,
For the other players are doing.
yeah, the high probability somebody beats you.
Yes, yes, yeah. So talking about the probabilities of someone perhaps beating you, I think leads us to the model, right? So we talked about empirical data, we talked about the real life phenomena that is of interest to us. Can we find a model that helps us try and understand what could actually be happening? So we'll see how far we can go with the model. So we would like to have a model that can capture major trends in the data. That would be one perhaps requirement. Another one is that the model is useful, that the model tells us something perhaps that we didn't know before, or that the model allows us to make predictions that we have not yet observed. The last one is not a real requirement of any model. It's just a convenience statement, if you will. We'd like the model to make psychological sense. I'll put this in quotes because people use the term psychologically plausible or psychological plausibility, and nobody knows what this means. But it is convenient that the model has a good story. I'm not saying that it is correct or incorrect. It is just convenient because it helps people understand and relate to that model. And to some extent, we are merchants. We are selling our models to a community. So we wanted to make good psychological. From my end, to make a model that has good psychological sense, it would have been really nice to rely on an existing psychological theory. So rather than invent something completely new and convince the psychological community that it's a great theory, we could rely on a model that is been well established. And the one that I really liked when I already was, an undergraduate student was prospect theory, developed by Kahneman University. But I have to say that I had the idea in mind that prospect theory would be a great model for this in a way that I'll show in a second, but I had no idea how to implement this. And sometimes you need to rely on good colleagues for this as well. And so here's Scott Brown, who's very good computationally and mathematically, really helped me to set up the model for the purpose of our experiment. So I'm not quite sure how much of prospect theory is actually taught. Yeah, I'll finish in one minute. So maybe I won't describe the model in great detail, and so I don't need to ask how much is known about prospect theory. I'll only say maybe the following to give you just a gist of how the model works, right? So don't worry about, in fact, let me hide this for just a minute. So prospect theory is often used to explain decisions in what is called risky decisions or uncertain decisions. And you've seen an example. It could be, what would you rather have? Would you rather have $1 now or $2 with a probability of 0.5? $1 now or $2 next year? And so on and so forth, right? So one option is couching certain terms and the other one is often couching uncertain terms. And Kahneman firstly identified many regularities concerning gain and loss aversions and all sorts of phenomena. But the point, I think, common to those decisions is that people need to evaluate both the outcome of some action or decision and the probability with which it is going to happen. In the Dutch auction, you can think about the auction as a sequence of many such decisions. Suppose the auction just starts now. So at this very moment, there is some price to pay, and I have some probability or likelihood that my bid will be successful. Now, at the very first step of the auction, if I'm bidding, my probability of winning is probably 1 or 100%, because nobody else is willing to pay that high of a price. So at this time step, I have the cost that I need to pay, how much I'm willing to pay, which is quite high, but also complete certainty about the outcome. Suppose that I did not pay. I move on to the next time step. A second had passed. And I now need to make, again, another decision. Similar decision, but with different values of those variables. The price went down, so my cost is now smaller, but also my degree of certainty changes. Because now, as the price goes down, other players may have higher appetite for bidding or paying. And so as I wait longer and longer, price goes down, so my cost goes down, but also the risk that I will miss the bid changes. And so if the original prospect theory is concerned with only one decision at a time, our implementation can be really viewed as an iterative instantiation or extension of prospect theory. Make one decision now, then make one decision in another time step, in another one, And we so constantly make decisions until one of the players is bidding. So I need to probably finish now. I will only say that we have not fit the model to data, but we try to recover or generate qualitatively similar patterns. And this is one example. This would be the paper data. And you can see that the model can produce patterns that look quite similar. And the model can also produce the major effect that I was interested in, that of the starting price. So low starting price, low bid, high starting price, high bid, both for the model and for the real data. You see that the model can capture important trends. I think I'm over time, so maybe I'll very quickly summarize. Dutch auction, a fantastic phenomenon to study. It is interesting because it allows us to explore theoretical concepts of how people trade off certainty versus price. It is also a very practical problem, one that is related to huge markets. And it also allows us to try and extend our model techniques to teams, groups, not just a single individual. So with that, I will thank you very much. And if we have any questions, that is great. And if we don't have time, I am happy to answer them at a later stage. Thank you, folks.
One question.
Where it can be translated, like you said, it's an iterative application. It's meeting those utility fields, very famous, apply without any deformation. You just apply this curve, it's exactly the same, but the utility it's like it's not J plus 5. So it's just a point on the curve.
So I hope I will be answering this correctly, Jim. Are you thinking about time as in within a time, or are you thinking about time across many options?
Are you talking about time? No, I'm sorry, I'm talking about process trial.
Within a single auction. So within a single auction, we need to constantly update those utilities based on what we think happens with the other players. So remember, this is a competitive environment. And because it is a competitive environment, each time I have not made a bid also increases the likelihood that another person would make a bid.
That question could make the utility that is some way.
What you think other people are doing, exactly. And I have to say, this is complicated in the analysis or the modeling by the fact that within each auction, there is 3 players. So the 3 players are competing against one another. But within each auction, you only end up with 1 data point.
Right.
You only record the winner. Right? So you have 3 players. As soon as one of them bids, you don't have any data for the other 2. So the model needs to somehow make an estimate about what the utilities of the other players are. There's incomplete information, and that's why we need a spot round to make those computational estimates.
So your Dutch application actually you like to compare the interaction of the outcome is actually you know how much you're going to sell the stuff, so much better.
Yes.
And then the problem there's also this kind of thing that goes with psychological aspect and how it either the side how we gather players and do not use those very big. But in essence, the market is in the now playing this while it's player I would like to not play the economic utility. I would like to know whether I invest enough money or take enough money out of it if available depending on my course of action. But you have to decide to technologically it's still if there's no information or the player game are just not spending anything, they're not putting anything at risk. They're not moving their real money like their real players. Which form of action and the form of action action lot. So it's kind of a question about whether this could actually generalize the real application at all. It could explain how psychologically people in a similar case, but may not generalize the real life. Have you ever feel that?
Yes, I think that is a very legitimate concern. So the point that Mario was raising is that people don't really lose money here. They play on some virtual funds. And I think most importantly, they don't have any resale value. So the real florist invests some money in order to sell the commodity later in some price. And here, that stage does not exist. So this simulated environment is indeed very limited. And I don't think we can ignore that. There's a few elements that make us feel reasonably comfortable with the simulated environment. One is that studies in economy show that in simulated auctions, people actually have a similar subjective evaluation as to spending real money. And they do this using among other things, physiological measures to show that there's similar physiological reactions that are accompanying a real investment with simulated. You should come to the lab to see how this works, right? So 3 people sit and they start very civil. They're very polite. Good morning, how are you doing? And 10 minutes into the game, they are shouting and cursing into the monitor, and I'll get you, and I'll get this first. And so it becomes a very animated environment. So, but, at the end of the day, a real investigation would have to respect it and would have to go into the field and ask. I should take one step back, right? So I'm interested in both the theory as well as the applied aspect. So I don't want to give up so easily on the controlled environment that we have in the lab. The controlled environment allows us to build a model. And that model then can explain the data and make some future predictions. I'm equally interested in how this works in real life. And I think that at the end of the day, to understand how it works in real life, you need to go out to the world to conduct a study in the real world. And that is what some of our students in the lab are doing. And indeed, in the NFT domain, it turns out that if you're sophisticated enough, you can actually track the resale value. You can get good estimates of what had been the resale value of a particular token. Suppose that I bought something now for some given price. If you're smart enough, I'm not smart enough to do that, my students are, and they can check the resale value of this sum of the tokens, try and understand what is the connection between how much you were willing to bid and how much you were able to sell it later on. I think I probably need to stop here, but I welcome any future questions or suggestions as we walk around and have a chat. Thank you very much, everybody.